Hello everybody, Kelly Rice here, but I write under my pen name KM Rice, and I just want to say, after having edited over 30 of these vlog episodes, it kind of creeps me out how every time I say that I sound the same. I don't know if I'm supposed to sound different or not, but it's kind of weird. To start off with, to show you my cool medieval top, it's got like a little lace-up thingy and little lace there, and makes me feel kind of like I'm in the Renaissance or something. For the record, I understand that the Renaissance and the medieval era are two different eras, but, you know, just throwing that out there. So, welcome everyone. I would like to talk today about a subject that's kind of been on my mind lately, and it is called storytelling. My mind just went blank. Got it again. Oh my gosh. Storytelling stamina. And you'll notice I'm not saying writing stamina, because if you've seen my vlog, Writers versus Storytellers, you know that it's easiest for me to talk about the craft separating those two aspects of it. The writing to me has always been the mechanical part and the more logistics part, and the storytelling has been where the passion and the inspiration and the heart is. Because, as I said in that video, those two don't always go hand in hand. But the goal is to make them go hand in hand, and so you kind of discover if you're stronger in the other one, you need to work on the latter and the former, and I just butchered the use of latter and former, but you know what I mean. Most of you have seen that episode, because it's becoming a popular episode. I think because it's short, and simple, and sweet. So, I would like to talk, yes, about storytelling stamina. Now, I could do a separate episode about writing stamina, but I think that everyone kind of finds that on their own. I don't know if there's enough to talk about. That's just literally coming up with a physical routine, you know, taking care of yourself ergonomically, setting boundaries, all of that, which everyone kind of has to find in their own time and in their own fashion. However, storytelling stamina is an exercise of the mind and the imagination, and it is work. And it can take the stuffing out of you. So, having written, oh no, at least 8 books, I'll just say 8 because whatever. Having written 8 books now, and yes, not all of them are published. Okay, 9, because I also helped write that Middle-earth from script to screen, building the world of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings book with Daniel Falconer at What a Workshop, available now on Amazon.com. So, having gone through all these different writing experiences, writing these books, I thought I'd share a little bit with you about not necessarily what the writing process is like, but what it's like, this is going to sound really hippie, but on a spiritual level, because I don't know quite how else to explain imagination other than to me, it's more aligned with something spiritual than it is aligned with, you know, I talk a lot about the idea of the subconscious and how the subconscious is actually where a lot of your storytelling is going on behind the scenes. But much farther than that, I don't understand the mechanics. I'm not a psychologist. So, and I'm not sure if even they would be able to tell you. So we'll just work with what Kelly has. And first off, I wanted to issue a caution. If you are writing really heavy subject matter, you're going to have to make sure that you're checking in with yourself. And I know this is going to sound silly to some people, but make sure you're checking in with yourself for your own well-being as you're writing. Because as I mentioned in my most recent vlog about character creation, a lot of writing is like acting. And you're putting yourself in the perspective of the character. You're feeling those emotions, or at least some of us are. Some of us might not write that way, but I 100% write that way, because to me the storytelling has always been my drive, and the writing is something I'm still learning. As evidenced by Darkling, I'm sorry, I'll get back to my point, but I'm just bringing up, a lot of you have read Darkling, and a lot of the criticism or suggestions that I receive from Darkling is that people want more details, they want more descriptors. And that book is light on them because, to me, the heart of the story was not in what everything looked like, but in what it felt like. And other people respond brilliantly to that in that book, and they felt like they were the characters, and it made it so much more alive for them. But I am, I do want to strike that balance. So I'm aware that descriptions, and that to me falls under the mechanics of writing, are a weakness of mine, and that's something that I need to work on. But I think a lot of us, we talk about inspiration. Inspiration is the spark that drives you to spill your word blood on the computer screen, on the paper, and that is where the passion's at, and that's where the storytelling's at. So a lot of us, I think, fall into not this trap, but these patterns of not necessarily being able to self-edit in a way of shining a magnifying glass on our work and saying, okay, that's my weakness. And so feedback like that is really helpful. Now, going back to the idea of self-care while you're writing, because to me that is a thing, I've experienced negative side effects of telling dark stories. And in this moment, I'm not referring to Darkling. I wrote that so long ago that I can't exactly remember what the psychological process of that was like. But my upcoming series, Afterworld, and I'll say this with as few spoilers as possible, because I don't enjoy spoilers, and I don't want to be giving out spoilers for my books. I want you guys to be able to have fun and have that element of surprise. But there are some dark times in these stories. Let me just put it that way. There are dark times. And there are characters in serious situations that are gut-wrenching to write. When you are very attached to these people, I'll call them people rather than characters, because at some point they do take on a life of their own, and they're living and breathing beside you. And when you're watching them go through suffering, even though you know they have to, it's going to affect you. If it's not, you might want to take a step back and analyze your relationship with that character. If it's a bad guy and they're getting their comeuppance, then of course that should feel satisfying. But if you have no qualms whatsoever about this character going through some form of physical suffering or emotional suffering, then maybe check in with your relationship with that character. And by that, I mean make sure that the character feels alive to you, because if they don't feel alive to you as the author, if you don't feel that empathy or compassion for them as the author, then the reader is not going to either. So there's something you might need to work on with that character. So I do think that it is kind of important to feel icky when you're writing icky scenes, because you have to be in that headspace and on some level in that emotional space. So as I was working on Afterworld, like I said, there are some dark times. What I found is that I was getting crankier. So in my daily life, when I wasn't writing, my head obviously is still in the story and mulching the material of the story and figuring out what's going to happen next, and can I go back and brush up on this part or whatnot. So it's you guys know, it's always in there. I've sometimes described it as a beehive in the back of your mind. There's always this constant buzzing of storytelling going on, even when you're not sitting there writing. Again, that's why I separate storytelling from writing, because to me, again, writing is the mechanics. So I could be out walking the dogs, or for a hike, or shopping, or whatever, and a little thing might set me off, and I would snap at someone, or I would be frustrated far more easily than I should be. And at one point, I think it might have been my mom, she's like, what are you working on? What are you writing? Because she noticed this change in my attitude that I wasn't even necessarily consciously aware of. I thought I was just irritated that I was having to do mundane things or whatever. Live my life rather than just glued to the computer. And I remember stopping and thinking about it, because she was like, whatever you're working on, dude, it must be bad. Not bad, but it must be like, she could see the change in me. And that made me pause and have a little moment of self-reflection, be like, yeah, I'm writing some hardcore stuff right now, and that is getting to me, because I do love my characters, and as much as I know that this is part of the story and that they need to go through this suffering, it's still really difficult to write. And it was trickling into my everyday life. So that's why I wanted to start with that, because that's the most extreme example I can think of in my anecdotal evidence of why self-care is important and why you need to check in with yourself. I wasn't aware of that yet. I wasn't, all I was thinking of, as I've talked about in my video on the writing process, I get kind of enveloped in my own world, and I can get lost in the writing. And so to me, the self-care was like, make sure you're eating, make sure you're taking care of your responsibilities, make sure you're functioning, and also getting the work done. Versus, how is this getting to you? And the only thing that I could think of was to write those really intense dark moments in spurts. So limit your exposure to it if you find that it is negatively affecting you. Write until you start to feel emotionally exhausted, until you start to feel tired, until you start to feel your thoughts kind of fraying at the edges, and take a break. Take a break and maybe go back and look at some other part of the story. Edit that other part of the story, or maybe go for a walk, do whatever. Do something to re-energize yourself and stop that train of thought. Because as creatives, we are so invested in our work, and this is true, like I always say, for artists of all kinds. Songwriters, filmmakers, anyone. And it's important to recognize when you are kind of going down that path of grumpiness, that path that has the potential to not diminish your work, but it also has the potential to lead you into a more melodramatic mindset that will carry over into your daily life, but it could also potentially be reflected in your writing, and especially when you're writing about anything miserable. So you do want to check in with yourself first, because you are the originator of the story. Take care of yourself, and let the dark stuff sit. Maybe keep going, keep telling the story. That's what I usually do, because that's how I write. So keep telling the story, and then when you're feeling up to it, go back and revisit those scenes, and you'll find that there was a lot that is missing because you were emotionally exhausted. It was enough for you to just write it with one character's journey in mind. And now you have to go back and add the other character's journey in the same scene. Maybe you notice someone kind of fell by the wayside, or someone wasn't reacting as evocatively as you know that they would. And that, again, is because it takes the stuffing out of you. It can take a lot out of you, and you shouldn't try to do it all in one sitting. I think that wouldn't be healthy, and it wouldn't be good for you, and it wouldn't be good for your work. So it is important, especially for the very dramatic scenes, to go back after some time and rewrite them. The second thing I will say about that is be very careful with your editing. Again, I'm like vague booking on Facebook. I'm like vague vlogging about Afterworld. And there are, like I said, some heavy scenes. So there's one scene in particular that I looked at again and I thought, maybe I had to write it out in its fullness just to do it, but maybe the fullness of this darkness doesn't serve the story. Maybe I can soften it a little. So I looked for any corners that I could kind of round just to soften the blow. And there weren't many. And I continued on my way. But every time I edited that book, I would go back to that scene, and my instinct was to cut. And I had one draft where I was like, I should take out this and that and that and that and that. Oh my gosh. Okay, now I feel better. And then I reread the scene. And guess what? It was really flat and had, because I took out all the icky stuff, I took out everything that made me uncomfortable, everything that made me, my heart break for the characters. So I gutted it. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, I'm being precious here. I'm trying to protect these fictional people, and I'm trying to spare them this important moment in their journey. And I can't do that. So it was difficult for me to find the balance between what's going overboard and bringing the text, the manuscript, whatever, the story, to a level that makes you squirm and are very uncomfortable, and what is keeping it in true with the tone of the overall story but also not making sure you fall into that trap of, because I will call it a trap, of self-soothing and being like, but I want everything to be okay for them, so I'm just going to go through again and, you know, like I said, soften all the edges. That's an important part of the editing process, I've discovered. And I wanted to pass that on to you guys because I know we're not all writing stories about the fluffy bunny who went to the market and was sad because there were no carrots. That could be really tragic, though, if done right. That could be really tragic. Another instinct that you may notice as you're writing heavy scenes, and I've touched on this before, is the impulse to include humor. Sometimes you just really want to break up the tension by having one of the characters say a zinger or something funny. And that, I think, is almost always a good instinct. If that's how it feels the most natural to you to write it, especially at your first pass, then write it that way. And again, once it's all down on paper and you've let it settle for at least a few days, go back and look at it and make sure that none of the humor feels out of place or disrespectful or inauthentic. And you never want it to look like the writer's going to the reader, you know, you want it to remain, you want the instinct to break up the tension to be coming from a specific character rather than you. So you don't want to just have character number 3 making a joke and then character number 4 and character number 1 rather than, you know, maybe those two characters are in a fight and the first one is like trying to diffuse it by making these jokes. Make sure that it's still following a pattern of human behavior that like I said, I always use the word authentic because I don't know how else to describe how things feel in a story. So make sure that it's still following along those lines rather than each character cracking a joke in the middle of an argument or something, and that's because you saw an opportunity for something funny to be said and you were trying to break up the tension for yourself because it was difficult for you to write that scene. Again, go ahead and write it that way the first pass, but when you look at it again, make sure you're looking at it through that lens of how would this be playing out? And does this feel real, or is this interjecting the tension in a positive way, or is it side railing the tension? Because that's the other thing. Tension is good. You know, you want to build tension between the words on the page and your reader. You want your reader to be frustrated going, why don't I have this answer yet? You know, this isn't a spoiler. Darkling begins, and within the first page or two, maybe even the first couple paragraphs, I should know, right? Whatever. I'm a bad author. Willow, the main character, says, I have a secret. So, the main question is, what's her secret? And I remember giving it to one of my very first readers, who was my friend Leanne, and I hadn't even given her the book yet. I think I just had a copy of it. I'm like, oh yeah, I wrote this book, and she's like, oh cool, and she started flipping through, and I remember she just sat there quiet for a little bit, and then she goes, Kelly, can you just tell me what's the secret? Because Leanne's one of those people who likes spoilers. And she's like, what's her secret? And I'm like, you have to read it. She's like, do you have a copy? I need to know what her secret is. So that's called a hook, ladies and gentlemen, but that seems like a different episode. But I was glad that was successful and that it sparked her curiosity. So that tension is going to carry her through the first chapter or two, or however long it takes until you discover what that secret is, because you want to know. Unless the writing's really bad and the story really fizzles out, then you're like, you know what, I don't freaking care what the secret is. I'm going to use this as a coaster or toilet paper, which you guys could totally do with my books if you want. Actually, no, the toilet paper idea is a bad one. I don't think those papers will dissolve very well, and they might clog your toilet. How do I always get onto the subject of toilets? I don't know. Someone psychoanalyzed me. I clearly have some sort of toilet dysmorphia or something. I don't even know. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. I'm gonna have a sip of water now. Humor and drama, though seemingly paradoxical, go together incredibly well. Humor can make the dramatic more dramatic, and drama can make the humor funnier. Some of my favorite TV shows have exemplified this perfectly. I love that the BBC Being Human, and I love Lucifer, and both of those shows use drama juxtaposed with humor. Being Human far more so. That show is not a procedural, so it had room to really delve. But they're good. I want to say bedfellows, but that sounds gross. I never really thought about that phrase before, but they go really well hand in hand. And like I said, they complement each other, and having that little light moment amidst the tension is good, because then it refreshes the reader, it refreshes the reader's mind, and then they can invest completely in the drama and the tension again. So, and it keeps that level of humanity rather than miserable angst that can cross the line and become white noise, and you never want that to happen. You don't, and I guess that kind of goes back to my first few points, which is that you do need to self-edit, and that's why I was saying maybe I overwrote the scene. I didn't want it to be like, dun, 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 and then the reader's like, yeah, okay, I am no longer emotionally invested because this just got so big or so heavy or so intense that I've lost my footing. And of course that's a danger, not just with writing dark scenes, but any intense scene. That's what I mean by melodrama. You don't want the reader to lose their footing, so that's where it's a very delicate balance. I don't know if I've achieved it. I don't know if I'm an expert at that at all. I'm just following my own instincts and following my gut, which you should always do, by the way. And if you ever watch this vlog and you're like, I think she's full of shit, and that's not true for me at all, then cool, that's awesome. It's not true for you. Don't listen to me then. Follow your own instincts and follow your own gut for your own storytelling, because that's the most important thing. No one else can tell the story the way that you will. Literally no one else on the planet can tell the story the way that you will. It is your story, not mine, and no one else's. So learning how to stay true to that is one of the first stages of completing a book, I feel, because that's how you get to know your own voice and your own intrinsic integrity in storytelling. And those are very important things. But that was another little aside, wasn't it? Vice versa, it can sometimes be tiring to write comedic scenes, because if you're not in the mood, you know, this goes back to the idea of writing as work. If you're not in the mood to be like, haha, this is so funny, and like I've just got all these zingers and like it's just coming out of me, it's gonna be like, oh my god, what is something funny? They need to say something funny here. Oh my, you ate my cheese. It's not funny. Sometimes if I know there's just like a line or two, I'll put something in, I'm like, god, that's flat. Ugh, it's bad. But I give myself permission and I go on and I keep writing, and I know I'll come back, and at some point, like I said, it will enter my subconscious and it'll start getting mulched around, and then it will come out and it will be something funny. Hopefully something funny on multiple levels, so that it's not just something you can take out and it won't, you know, detract from the book. Hopefully it's funny in a way that also adds to some subtext or character trait or whatever. You know, you want stuff, if you can, to serve more than one purpose. But I do think it's okay if stuff only serves one purpose, especially in the beginning. And this is what people never really explain in writing classes and stuff. I'm sorry, this is a tangent, but they're always like, oh, you know, everything has to serve a purpose, and, you know, there should be layers and blah, blah, blah. You know what? Sometimes you're just freaking building a character and building a world, and there is no ulterior motive to that. So especially in the beginning, it's okay to do that, because like me, say someone's writing about me, there she is, she looks at the camera and she's got long hair and hazel eyes and pale skin, you know, so as the reader, are you supposed to be like, oh my god, this is all a symbol, like the long hair is symbolic for the length of her ability to focus on her secret crush on her teacher. I don't know, sorry, I'm not pulling this off very well, but you're not going to be looking into everything for those layers. After you've built your first layer, and your second and your third, that's when you can start making references to those other layers, if that makes sense. So, I don't know where that fits in storytelling stamina, it just popped into my head and I thought I should share it, because it always kind of peeves me when people are like, yeah, everything, man, everything's gotta have symbols and double meanings and all this and illusions, and it's like, no, it doesn't. Sometimes you're just building a character and building a world, and until you have those things built, you can't make those illusions. Because we're not all Edmund Spencer. We're not all writing, what was it, Fairy Queen? And having everything be an illusion because we're not expecting our entire audience to have read the Bible and all the Arthurian legends and know everything about the history of Britain. You know, we don't go into this expecting things. I'm sorry, this is like a mini rant. I'm not yelling at you, I'm just yelling, and I'm not even yelling. My voice is actually really soft, it just got weirdly deep and hoarse. So yeah, we start with fresh audiences, so we build illusions to our own work as we go on. I suppose that fits into storytelling stamina because it's telling you, pace yourself. Pace yourself because that will come in time. And naturally. And like I said, that's part of the rewriting process. You might go back and then you'll have a moment to foreshadow or you'll have a moment to add those extra layers to what you already were working on. But you don't know it until you know it. And you often don't know it until you're further into the piece. So always cut yourself slack. I suppose that's the overarching message of this episode. Be gentle on yourself. Cut yourself some slack. Check in with yourself. Real quick, just to go back to talking about writing icky scenes, if they're making you feel icky and uncomfortable, do practice that self-care. Disengage for a little bit. Come back to it with a fresh mental headspace and see what you can do with it. Avoid the urge to over-edit, but know that if it's making you uncomfortable, that's not a bad thing. When I wrote my first book in the Afterworld series, Ophelia, which is hopefully coming out soon, I'll keep you posted, there was a lot that made me feel icky in it. You'll read it and you're like, what the flip is she talking about? But it was new for me. I wrote it anyway, and I realized that what that discomfort was actually me pushing my boundaries. And then I got kind of addicted to that feeling of being able to push my boundaries in terms of storytelling and see where can I go that I haven't gone before and what can I explore. Not addicted, but it became a very rewarding experience to travel into new territory. And anytime you're traveling into new territory, you're like, oh gosh, am I good at this? I don't even know if I'm pulling it off. Is this character even realistic? You know, is anyone going to be able to relate to them? All those thoughts are, of course, going to be going through your head, and those are a lot of the doubts. But what you need to do is, again, let it settle. Be gentle with yourself. And once you have the piece as a whole, you can look back at it and be like, God, it's so weird that I was uncomfortable with XYZ when I look at it now and I'm like, it fits. Everything's perfect. Well, not perfect, but like nothing stands out as something that shouldn't be there because you did it and you were following your gut and everything's authentic to the tone that you feel the story was necessitated. So that's some of my advice on storytelling stamina. I'm sure I'll come up with more as time goes on and I might do another episode on it. But please, guys, send me your questions. Send me your questions and I'm happy to answer them. And I wish you all happy writing. Again, if you're still watching this and you found that this was insightful or helpful, you could help support me in this vlog, which I do obviously for free, by pitching me $1 on Patreon. And that's just $1 a month, so that's $12 a year. If you fall on hard times and you can't, afford the $12, you can cancel. And just that helps me keep plugging along. And of course there are 2 other tiers. If you want to see some really weird things, you can pay $5 a month and you'll see weird stuff. That's called Monthly Madness. It's me being, I choose moments, dude. I choose like weird. You'll get it when you get it. And then for $10 there's Scribblings, which is a piece of what I'm working on, or reading, or poetry, anything like that, if you find you really like my work, or you want just smaller tidbits of my work or whatnot, then that'll get you that. And again, you can cancel at any time, and also once you do subscribe, you have access to everything that's come before. So there's several months worth of stuff on there if you want to peruse. Yeah. And as always, you can get autographed copies of my book through my Etsy shop. The links to all these things are in the description. I've got a newsletter. I've got all this stuff going on. So if you somehow listen to me talk for this long, you might want to take a second to look in the description at all these links in case you want to stay in touch. So I hope that helps, folks. And I pre-planned this. Pre-planned, that's kind of oxymoronic. I planned this to sign off with this pine cone. It's a closed pine cone. It's pretty warm in the house, so it might eventually open. This pine cone is from, I believe it was a Monterey pine that we had to have felled because it got weakened during the drought, and these terrible little beetles attacked it and killed it. I know they're just trying to live and do their thing, but they've killed so many trees around here, and it's just heartbreaking for me. So, this is a pine cone from the tree that was my friend. And it can still be my friend as it dissolves into the earth. But from me and my pretty little pine cone, wish you all a very fond farewell. Till next time, see you folks. Author vlog. Today I wanted to talk to you about... What am I talking about? I have a pig nose. What am I talking about? Storytelling. Storytelling stamina. Redo that.